This is a bit more nerve-wracking for me than last year's, because last year's I spoke about social media stuff and I was quite happy that most of the room I was speaking to knew nothing about social media stuff, so I could say any bull and get away with it. Now I'm talking to harm reduction people about injecting. I'm slightly more nervous. It's called Injecting Rituals. You'd be very happy to know it's not all going to be about putting people in wicker men and burning them and that kind of ritual. There's going to be no casting spells. We're not going to be closing circles or squaring circles or any of that rubbish. It's just going to be about injecting. A ritual is a religious or solemn ceremony consisting of a series of actions performed according to a prescribed order. Now I think that's quite a good description of injecting. Even down to the solemn part of it. If you think about the way that people approach injecting, it is a solemn thing a lot of the time, unless they're really rattling and they're in a real hurry. But this is what Grun says about it. Drug use in general represents an extraordinary event that requires thorough preparation, rehearsal, distinctive material and symbols. Now that's somebody talking specifically about drug use, and still brings in that kind of solemn, the rehearsed, the fact that there's symbology there. Who knows who this guy is? Nobody. You do, John, thank you. That's Skinner, that's B.F. Skinner, behavioural psychologist. This is the man who allegedly put his daughter in a box to find out how that would affect her upbringing. He didn't really, don't worry. But one thing he did do is he did some brilliant experiments with pigeons, where he gave a pigeon a reward for doing an action. And there's a brilliant piece of video, if you put B.F. Skinner into YouTube, you find a brilliant piece of video where he gets a pigeon, puts it on the table, and if it makes a slight move this way, he gives it some feed. So it gets that dopamine reward. And then if it makes a bigger move that way, he gives it some more feed. And it takes him about 30 seconds to train a pigeon to do a 360-degree turn in the direction he wants it to. Drug use is very similar. You have an action that has a reward. And sometimes if that reward doesn't happen, you automatically assume whatever you changed is what caused that. A common one for that would be, for instance, somebody using Vit C for the first time instead of citric. And because the gear that they bought that day is crap, they have a bad hit, Vit C gives you bad hits. I've had that loads. Vit C always gives me a bad hit. He's probably done it once and it was nothing to do with the Vit C. But the Vit C was the thing that was different in that person's ritual. So they automatically associate it with that. I personally think the more steps there are in a ritual, the stronger that ritual is going to be for a person. If you think about some of the Catholic masses, they're very big, long. You know, I'm quite glad I'm an atheist, so I don't have to go to church and listen to people doing these long rituals. But there's things like this, the tea ritual. I have my own. I'm a huge coffee drinker. I have so much paraphernalia to do with coffee preparation, and I get such a lovely kick from making the perfect cup of coffee that's my drug ritual. And I don't get a serious drug effect. I get a bit of a caffeine kick from that. So imagine that with an extra crack rush on the end of it. That's going to strengthen that ritual even more, much more than it would to get a pigeon to do 360 for food. But if you think about this, more steps is a stronger ritual. This is smoking heroin. Smoking heroin has 3 steps. Straighten the foil, roll a tutor, heroin on the foil. Injecting has 6 to 12 steps, depending on how much you're going to put into it. So you've got the whole getting your candle ready or your lighter ready, you've got getting the spoon ready, putting the citric, putting water, heating up, stirring, heating up, stirring, getting everything just perfect, and then drawing up through the filter. It's a multiple stage ritual. And you can see why any of you who've ever cooked up heroin for real, or any of you who are drugs trainers who repeatedly have to do cooking up exercises, it's a really, I've never injected heroin. I tell you something, I love the cooking up process. It's a wonderful ritual, and it's very almost soothing doing it. I do, on my training, I do a exercise where I have 20 different steps in the injecting process. And I give one person each one of the steps and tell them to put themselves in order of the perfect injection. And then they have to put themselves in order of the perfect steroid injection and the perfect up your bum, the perfect groin injection, or somebody injecting in a hurry. Now there's multiple steps in there that are wrong. You've got this. You've got the classic licking the needle from train spotting that Alison mentioned earlier on just a minute. It's not a good idea, but I keep that in there. And what you find is that if you do that with drugs workers, it takes them ages to work out that that shouldn't be in that ritual. I've done the same exercise with drug users. Drug users take licking the needle out straight away because they know it's wrong, because drugs workers have been telling them for ages you don't do it just because they do it in train spot. They do keep certain aspects in. One which has always been kept in by every drug user I've ever done it with is cleaning the blood out the needle afterwards. Now, if I'm doing work with that person, I can then say, well, why are you doing that? Obviously, it's for reuse. I'll give you as many needles as you can physically carry out with the exchange. You don't need to do that. You need to kind of take that part out of your ritual. This is from Nidell. This is going back to the 1940s. Actions exhibiting striking or incongruous rigidity, some conspicuous regularity not accounted for by professed aims of the actions. Not everything in a ritual is positive. Rituals are quite often negative things. Again, like licking the needle, but they're kept in there. This guy wasn't talking about drugs. Nidell was just talking about religious ceremony. But it fits perfectly. Everything to do with religious ceremony just fits perfectly with drug use. It's great. Part of our role as harm reduction workers, because some of us still are harm reduction workers, not recovery workers, part of our role as harm reduction workers is changing people's rituals. Behaviour change, but it's changing people's rituals at the end of the day. Now, there's this wonderful temptation, especially with things like payment by results and DATs pressuring you to do step A with every single person and this with every single person, to go into the really obscure stuff. So talking to somebody when they first come into your service about their Hep C risks and about the likelihood of them having Hep C, because that's the stuff that you've been trained on. It's really interesting and it's really in-depth. Do you know what, if I'm a young drug user coming into a service and you start talking to me about something which I probably won't have symptoms for, and if I do have symptoms for, they'll be the same symptoms that all of us have probably had at least 4 times in the last month, unless, apart from obviously the very pale stools and the going yellow thing. But it's very abstract. And if you say to me, you might or might not have this, and we can give you a test, and that test will say that you've been exposed, but not necessarily that you've got it, then you'll need another test for that. That's all so bloody abstract. I'm not really going to listen to you. So the one I tend to go for is, yeah, if you imagine people trying to change your rituals. People trying to change my morning ritual for my coffee ain't going to happen. And like Bill Drummond says, you know, it puts you all out of kilter. If you think of all your normal rituals being changed, it puts you out of kilter. That's from Muntz on Drug Forum. He thinks that rituals are like foreplay, which it kind of is, really. The whole thing with foreplay is all about anticipation, isn't it? And that's what the drug preparation process is. It's all about anticipation. But for the changing rituals, for me, I start small. So this is bruising that comes from using an alcohol swab. Simplest piece of harm reduction ever. Every service I've ever worked in for the first 3 months, I talk about when to use an alcohol swab. I walk in and somebody walks into the exchange, I'd say, do you use swabs? Yeah. Do you use them before or after? And it will either be both or after is the answer. Whereas the correct answer should be before, because it's an alcohol swab. You don't want to use it after. It's going to thin the blood and cause bleeding. And more bleeding causes more bruising. Now, if you're a young injector and you come into my exchange and you've got an arm covered in bruises and I give you that piece of advice, a week and a half later when you come back and if you've followed my advice, you're going to have far less bruising. Now that means straight away you know that I actually know what the hell I'm talking about. If I'd had the same conversation with you to do with Hep C, I could be full of shit for all you know. But you know what that I know what I'm talking about. So you're more likely, I've raised my social capital, you're more likely to listen to the next piece of advice I give, which will probably be about tourniquet technique, because that's another nice easy one to get in there, to get my social capital up. And then I can get onto the blood-borne virus stuff. Once people actually believe what I'm saying and understand that I'm saying the right things. The other thing is all the steps that you would have to take to change blood-borne virus risks, that's multiple things that have to be changed in your ritual. Now, any of you who've tried going on a diet know that making one small change really easy in your daily routine. If you're going to try and change 15 things in your daily routine, you're going to fail. You might keep it up for a week, but that's about it, because it takes too much energy. Whereas changing somebody's injecting ritual by one step at a time is more likely to be successful. There are exceptions to that. If somebody came into my exchange and said they wanted to quit now, or they wanted to change everything now, or they're in an absolute mess and they really need to do something about it, they're going to be highly motivated. So motivation, you can do anything with a motivated person. They will change then. That's where the whole, working to promote recovery really does kick in, because that's when somebody will want to change. And the whole thing about those other steps, those small steps, are to get people to the point where they're highly motivated for change. There's no point taking somebody who's not highly motivated for change and trying to change every single thing they do. And that's the horrible temptation, and what commissioners tend to want is for us to change everything about a person's behaviour on one visit. It's not realistic, both from a working point of view, but also from a behaviour change point of view. None of you would change all of your behaviours in one fell swoop, so don't expect other people to. But it is possible. Change is possible. We've got to remember that. I've worked with some managers, especially in the past, who I've had a client come into the needle exchange and say to me, I want some pins, I'm thinking of quitting and stuff, and I'll work with them. And then I walk out and I speak to my manager, and my manager says, oh, that's so-and-so, they've been coming here for years, they're never going to change. My point of view, that manager needs to piss off. And let us people who understand about behaviour change do some behaviour change with that person, because that person might be motivated now and they may never have been motivated before. And if he's been their worker, I can kind of understand why they've never been motivated. If it's somebody who doesn't believe that somebody can change something, and change doesn't necessarily mean stopping, it may mean just quitting, it may mean reducing, it may mean changing their route of transition. And that's it. I'm not talking for a long time. You've been talked to all day. But has anybody got